change your name by hovering over your picture, and then there's 3 little dots that appear above it, and you click on those dots and then it gives you a rename option.
Really?
Yes, you can all change your names if you like. But let's get started since we are at 2:05. I'm conscious of everybody's sunny Saturday after a rainy week. And we want to make sure we stop right at 4. So if everyone could please mute yourselves. I'm getting some feedback. I'm able to mute you, but I don't like exercising that situation unless I need to. This is our 4th roundtable. It's the final roundtable in this series of 4. As I have promised you before, I am going to host roundtables in the future to the degree that I'm in this interim period, and I will push for the commission to include this kind of event at regular intervals so that more people can participate. I think we've had hundreds of people from San Diego participate in these 4 roundtables, and it's been, for me, one of the joys of my life. I don't know how else to describe it, to see how people have shown up to talk about these difficult issues. And to imagine a future that Measure B lays out for us. It is now our job to ensure that our work together, everybody here and everyone who's attended the 3 previous roundtables, is recognized, acknowledged, and kept on the table as the City Council develops and passes the implementation measure that will make Measure B a reality. I'm going to give you a bit more of an update, and then we'll talk about what we're going to do today. Before I do that, you're accustomed to me doing this by now. The land acknowledgement. If folks could mute themselves while we go. But the land acknowledgement, although we're not all in the same location, we are all in and working on a measure related to San Diego. I'm going back to the first land acknowledgement I used, which was developed at San Diego State. For millennia, the Kumeyaay people have been a part of this land. This land has nourished, healed, protected, and embraced them for many generations in a relationship of balance and harmony. As members of the San Diego community, we acknowledge this legacy. We promote this balance and harmony. We find inspiration from this land, the land of the Kumeyaay. So, as I was just describing, this is our last of 4 roundtables in this particular series. Again, I've been astonished and thrilled and just so humbled and honored to be a part of this process with all of you. Our job now is to take everything we've done together and develop some brief proposals under a series of themes that will be taken directly to the Public Safety and Livable Neighborhoods Committee meeting on February 10th. The idea for today is not to relive or reopen everything we've talked about so far, but to discuss a few questions that we have talked about before, but that we want to have the community help us articulate some proposals for in a much more succinct way so that we can get them on the docket. I want to assure everyone that all of the notes from every previous roundtable, the syntheses that we've put together of our discussion, have been sent to City Council. And I know that at least some of the City Council members have read them. The members and their staffs have read all of them. So my advocacy for you will continue to be to ensure that what the community has done in this process is reflected in the implementation ordinance so that what we get with the new commission lives up to the promise of Measure B. Doug Case, who is a current member and chair of the Ad Hoc Transition Committee, is going to give an update in just a couple minutes about where things stand and what today is going to be all about. Then I'm going to give you a brief outline, which you may have seen on the agenda, of the specific questions we're going to talk about today. I'm keeping notes, others are keeping notes. We'll put together a document that I will then share with all of you so that you're able to see it at the same time that Doug then takes it to the Transition Committee meeting and eventually to the Public Safety and Livable Neighborhoods meeting. Again, that's only one document of the others that we've produced. So it's not the full reach of documentations of this process. I also just clearly want to, or briefly want to explain something that I know some community members have been a little confused by. The CRB no longer exists. It is gone. It's poof. What exists now is the Interim Commission on Police Practices, which means that everybody who was a member of the CRB, technically, according to the law, is now an interim commissioner. But you know, these are nobody appointed us to those roles. There was nothing happened, actually. The only thing that happened, so the text of Measure B included a stipulation that as soon as the measure became what's called chaptered within the city charter, which just means the Secretary of State signs off on it, the CRB immediately becomes the interim commission on police practices, and every CRB member becomes an interim commissioner. If you want some more details about that, you can go to that website where I've been tracking all the different steps. And there's more information about what that actually means and what it doesn't mean. Okay, Charmaine, I have to do a roll call just for the outreach committee since CRB is the official host of this. So Patrick Anderson is present. Ernestine Smith, are you here? I don't see Ernestine. Steve Shea, are you here?
Ernestine is here.
Ernestine is here.
Oh, there's Ernestine. Hi there.
I just had to uncancel myself.
Okay, well,
or
okay.
unmute myself.
Unmute, I think you mean. Uncanceling is harder. Steve Shea is not here. Maxine Clark, are you here? Joe Craver, are you here? And Brandon Hilpert, the chair of the former CRB, now interim commission, and ex officio member, I know that you're here. So that's the roll call. Doug, you now have about 5 minutes to give us an update and what we're going to do with the information we put together today.
Okay, thank you. And as you already mentioned, the Measure B was chaptered, and so we are now an interim commission, and we had our first commission meeting last Tuesday. We adopted interim bylaws. And by the way, the Secretary of State indicated that the effective date of the chaptering was December the 18th. So that defines when the new duties commence. We also, at our first meeting last week, didn't adopt, but we recommended standard operating procedures, which will allow the interim commission to continue doing its review work and other duties while we develop permanent policies. We learned last week that on February the 10th, the City Council's Public Safety and Livable Neighborhoods Committee will be taking 3 actions. First of all, they will be appointing the interim executive director, and we've recommended that our current executive director serve as the interim executive director, and a permanent executive director would be appointed once we have a permanent commission. They also will be voting to approve the standard operating procedures that we recommended for the interim. And they will be directing the city attorney to begin the process of drafting the implementation ordinance, which is the purpose of today's meeting. In Measure B itself, there are, I think, 3 different references to the implementation ordinance. One says the city council must by ordinance establish the number, term length, qualifications, and method for appointing members of the commission, and define the circumstances and process under which the city council determines there is cause for removal of a member of the commission. And that's the primary purpose of today's meeting. There are some other things that would be included in the implementation ordinance. So one is kind of a technical thing. The ordinance must include a definition of police misconduct. The new commission will have the ability to not only review investigations of complaints, but they will have the ability to review all investigations of police misconduct. And Measure B said the city council needs to define that, which probably will be up to the attorneys, but that's a second reference to the ordinance in the ballot measure. And the third one indicates, and let me just read it to you. The city council may by ordinance mandate additional duties and authorize additional powers for the commission consistent with this section and applicable federal and state law. And so the city council can give the commission additional duties. I know, for example, some of us are interested in being able to create a mediation program, and some of us are interested in giving the commission the power to make recommendations on the hiring of a police chief and the community evaluation of a police chief. So those are kind of some additional duties that could by ordinance be given to the commission. And then finally, it says the city council may also establish rules and procedures to implement this section. Some of that may be in an ordinance, some of it may be in permanent standard operating procedures, but that would include such things as how to conduct investigations and how to decide when to do a discretionary investigation, how the new commission will conduct its reviews and evaluation of internal affairs reports, which may or may not be similar to the way we currently do it. It will define the subpoena power, and will also determine the procedure for making recommendations with regard to discipline. Many of you have heard the term meet and confer, and all these items I just mentioned under rules and regulations could be things that could be subject to a meet and confer. A meet and confer is part of the California law with regard to collective bargaining by public agencies. And so those items will need to go through a process where the city conducts a good faith discussion with the POA, Police Officers Association, if they have any concerns regarding that. Our transition committee had initially recommended that the implementation ordinance, especially the critical part of it regarding the commission and how many members it has and how they're selected and so forth, be adopted first, and then the remaining items be adopted second, so that we could appoint the commission while we were still doing the meet and confer. Council member Monica Montgomery Stepp, who's spearheading the effort of the implementation ordinance, after talking with the city attorney, decided that it would be cleaner to accomplish it all at once. And so that may, the reason for doing it in 2 steps was so that we could get the new commissioners appointed expeditiously. And they could begin working while the meet and confer was going on, but it appears that it'll all be one step. Anyway, so the main purpose of today's meeting is to discuss what the commission will be composed of, how they're going to be selected, what their terms of office are, basically the things that are included in the next item on the agenda. So I'll turn it back over to Patrick.
Thank you, Doug. You are on top of everything, and it's really helpful to have that quick summary. I do want to make one clarification about something Doug said. So the community was insistent in our first 2 roundtables that any bylaws and standard operating procedures, those are 2 separate documents, developed by interim commissioners, be explicitly labeled as interim bylaws and interim standard operating procedures, and that they include language that the permanent commissioners would have to draft their own. That was accepted by the transition committee. That is what we did when we drafted the interim bylaws. and standard operating procedures. So when Doug said these are, interim measures while we develop permanent policies, he meant these are what we're using for the interim commission until the permanent commissioners develop the permanent bylaws and so on. We interim commissioners are not developing the permanent bylaws and standard operating procedures. In fact, our bylaws say that the permanent commissioners have to do that. So just to clarify that, I am going to share screen briefly to show you the topics for today. Are you able to see this? And is it big enough? Okay. So this is today's roundtable. Simple guidelines for today. Please keep your microphone muted when you're not speaking. Please use the raise hand button, which I believe has moved. I think if you click the reaction button at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a raise hand option. At least on the version that I have, that's where it is. Just a last note, remember there are lots of folks here. We want to have time to hear from everybody, given that we only have about an hour and a half for discussion. So these are the topics for today. Some of these are going to take us not much time at all. But these are the 7 items that Doug identified that would be really helpful to have explicit feedback from the community on for him to take, in addition to everything else we've discussed in the previous roundtables. Commission size and composition, there are 2 questions. The first is how to ensure diverse representation of the community. I'll talk about that one in just a moment. And the second is to establish a definition of youth for potential youth seats on the commission. Now, I don't think that second point is going to take us a lot of time. There seems to be consensus that those youth seats should be designated 18 to 24 years old, say. But we can certainly talk about that more if folks want to do so. Commissioner application and selection process. So the first question, who serves on the selection committee? This is an idea that has come out of these roundtables, that there be a community-based selection committee that reads the applications and makes recommendations to the city council about who should be appointed. And then secondly, what are the qualifications for commissioners? So could we talk about some things that that the community would like to include on a list of required or desired qualifications for those who apply? And then 3 questions under community or commissioner service. First of all, establish term length and term limits. There have been a lot of different suggestions, and I know there's not really consensus on this question. So we're not looking for consensus today. We're looking for a couple or a few ideas that have enough support that we could take them forward to PSLN. Secondly, what are reasonable expectations for service? So a major concern that's emerged is that for most working people, membership on the commission is just not viable. It's not doable. And that has to do with transportation to the meetings, childcare needs, elder care needs, and other accessibility issues. But it also has to do with how much time this work soaks up. Serving on the commission requires case review time, time for meetings, but then a whole lot of other stuff, including community outreach and engagement, including developing policy proposals, for SDPD to change its practices and so on. So we'd like to have a sense from you of what you think reasonable expectations for service could be. The former language of the former CRB, by the way, I believe said 10 hours a week on average, which at least in my experience is a gross underestimate. And finally, and this is one that I think a lot of folks are a conversation a lot of folks are hoping we'll have, which is to establish removal for cause guidelines within the bylaws themselves. I'm very happy to report back to you in roundtables 1 and 2, the community made the argument that the CRB removal for cause guidelines was unfair because it included restrictions on people who'd been convicted of a felony historically. The language was actually even broader than that. It was conviction of a felony or other crime or moral turpitude. I'm very happy to report back that we have now removed those from the interim bylaws for the commission. And I'll show you what I mean when we get to that point. But that's an outcome of this series of roundtables. Okay, so we'll start with this first category. Again, I don't think this is going to take forever to get through these. I'll share with you, I think many of you have seen this already. A group of us, after listening to various suggestions that had come out of these roundtables, put together a starting place for an idea about how the new commission might be distributed across San Diego, the city of San Diego. So the current practice is that in terms of what map the recruitment committee of the former CRB would look at, the recruitment committee would sort of look at the city council district map to try to ensure representation across all districts. And then there was a long and very involved process of taking applications, interviewing people, and so on. So place of residence wasn't the only criterion, but the only map that was really considered was the city council district map. Angelo Haynes in one of our first roundtables suggested using the SDPD division and beat map. And so a group of us got together and tried to use that suggestion in addition to data from fiscal year 19 on allegations made against SDPD officers. So this is a suggestion that if we assume, for example, 25 seats on the new commission, 9 of those seats would come from each of the city council districts, so 1 from each district. 10 seats would be subdivided according to a history of allegations within SDPD divisions made against officers. Here's the breakdown here. You'll see that 25% of allegations in 2019 occurred in Central Division, 21% from Mid-City Division, 21% from Southeastern, 14% in Western, and so on. And so if you look at this section here, those 10 seats would be appointed using that data. 2 commissioners from Central, 2 from Mid-City, 2 from Southeastern, and so on. 4 seats would be reserved to ensure other kinds of diversity on the commission, and then 2 dedicated youth seats would make up the last of the 25. So this is one idea for what this might look like. And I'm gonna, if it's all right with you all, I'm gonna stop sharing screen so we can look at each other's faces again while we have this part of the conversation. Again, you can use the raise hand function, but are there responses to that idea or changes you'd make to that idea? And I see
a little bit, there's some stuff happening in chat that you might want to attend to.
Okay.
Yeah, before we go to raise hands, because this has been coming up. So Jerry says this is a puzzling metric to use to divide seats. Don't the more privileged typically file complaints? Don't those that highly distrust PD so much so they may not complain from fear of retribution skew this idea?
Those are great questions. On the first question, that's the data does not show that the more privileged file more complaints. Your second question, so that folks don't complain for fear of retribution, I think that's a really important question, and I don't have an easy answer for it. Again, we're trying to think of a way, because so much of what the community has said that there needs to be more robust representation from over-policed communities. So we were trying to think of ways that might be reflected, that we could use data.
Patrick, I see Shane has his hand up and he's had a couple of questions. So go ahead. Maybe
Shane,
start.
I didn't see. So Shane, and then Kat, and then Jerry.
I don't know that your distribution really reaches the diversity question so much as the police divisions would, used exclusively. Are the police divisions pretty much equal in population? Do you know?
It's very hard to get that data. We don't have it yet.
Right.
They look, the police divisions look similar to city council districts, but are not exact replicas of city council districts. SDPD beats are much more interesting because they are neighborhood level, and in some cases are very small, small geographic areas.
So I think that the more important question is not numbers, even if we look at numbers, and I don't know that your numbers are any better than any others you would come up with. It is the question of where you turn to get those nominations, and the combination of community organization that is going to make the input. The more seats you have, the more opportunity for different organizations to get involved from their minute area. But I think that's going to be really the essence. So not so much of where they come from. I think that one of the reasons for the commission is to overcome that one comment that those most affected by what they perceive to be police improprieties are the ones to whom we must give confidence to speak up. And again, that's going to arise from people seeing, I think the term now is used, people that look like them that are on the commission.
Okay, thank you for that. Yeah, thank you for that. And we will get to the selection process in a few minutes, so we can come back to that too. Kat, and then Jerry, and then Doug.
You know what? This was a little far off. I raised my hand a while ago, but I wanted to address conflicts of interest. Possibly this could be under the selection process. If there are, because there are organizations who have spoken up that they wanted to be part of the commission, although there is a lot of collaboration with police. So people that don't collaborate with police at all, is this going to pigeonhole people on the commission? You know, people that have extreme distrust, because we're talking about including people that, you know, have extreme distrust and will not work with SCPD in any way. Will they be welcomed on the commission? Because there seems like there's this divide between progressive liberal groups and the people that feel they need to take a more radical stance. So I just wanted to put that out there, because there's grassroots organizations that don't receive any funding from any kind of pro-police politicians or, you know, district attorneys and police departments for collaboration. And I want them to have an equal say.
Okay, thank you for that. And I think we might come back to this too when we get to the qualifications for service in a few minutes. So thank you for that. Okay, Jerry, then Doug, then Catherine.
Hi, thank you. I echo to what Kat was saying, but my concern is that, you know, that culturally there are cohorts that refuse to work with the police or may not report, you know, the different abuses. So, for instance, in Southeast, I see police pulling over guys all the time, and they may just stop their car and not get out of the car, but are interacting with guys on the street. And that, you know, if the guy flicks a cigarette in the street, cop turns around and goes and barks at the guys, that kind of stuff. So my concern is that it seems we need a metric that more accurately reflects the maybe it's the number of hours, the patrol hours in their cars in
Interesting.
the neighborhood, or but actually use the metrics that are, you know, officer. That's a good one right there. Is I think they call it out of service hours. Like what's their in-service hours, and the out of service would be where they're doing paper and things like that. But
okay,
you know,
that
so
is.
It's just, you know, some areas, as we know, are highly harassed, and they would have a stronger representation per se.
Yeah, okay, so this is really helpful. I think it's pointing to our need for more data, including enforcement contexts and so on. And so this is something we will flag and also put on the radar of expectations for data that the eventual permanent commission should be producing, so the public can use that data in ways that that help it get the representation it wants. Okay, so Doug, then Catherine, then Justin.
I read in this morning's paper that the city of La Mesa has established their new oversight commission. And I read with interest that they have created some specific seats, including somebody representing the faith community, somebody representing the business community, somebody representing either mental health or advocates for the homeless. And I might add to that somebody with experience in the justice system. And I'm not sure whether we need to have specific seats for that, but I think those are things that we ought to be looking at to include. And I agree with the concept of making sure we have somebody from every city council district, and then we include more representation from those areas that are heavily policed. My concern is having a rigid system like that, because that seems to imply that the predominant criteria is geographical diversity, and I think other types of diversity are more important. So I would probably have a more flexible system.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think that's important. And maybe one thing that we could insist would be in the standard operating procedures and bylaws is that this is not a fixed system or question or formula, and the commission should be required to check back in with the community from regularly to see if the system is working or if tweaks could be made. Okay, thank you for that, Doug. Catherine, Justin, then Darwin.
Hi, Patrick. Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. First of all, as so often happens in these situations, other people have already said probably more eloquently what I might have said if my turn were sooner. So I think a lot of people have already expressed some really good ideas. And I really like what Doug was just saying too about different people from sort of different subject areas. I thought that was a great idea, but I was just going to add, I don't know if this is too obvious, but perhaps in lieu of looking at where the numbers of complaints are, what about just looking at the data on arrests? Is that too obvious? I don't know. It seems like looking at the data on police contacts would be great too. I just don't know if that's measured because, of course, as we all know, a lot of the contacts aren't documented. So that's a little bit of an issue, but to the extent, like someone just mentioned, patrol hours or actual arrests or bookings or things like that, can we track that and connect that to the number of seats? Although I understand, as somebody else was saying too, that need not be maybe so rigidly linked to that. But I think these are all really great creative ideas at getting a diverse group of folks on there.
Thank you for that. And that, I think, reinforces for me the idea of building flexibility and community accountability into this system too. No system's going to be perfect, so why not ensure that it be changed with the community's input over time? Okay, Justin, and then Darwin.
Yeah, I'll sort of piggyback on Kat. I did like I both liked the idea of looking at data for complaints. I have no idea how that correlates to interactions, but similar to the thoughts that others had suggested, some sort of metric that actually looks at community, interaction with the community, stops, arrests, whatever that may be, and maybe proportion to population as well. So that's all. Nothing real new to add, just parroting that.
Great. Thank you. Darwin, you're up.
Darwin, Racial Justice Coalition, and also on the Juvenile Justice Commission for the county. Let me just also add real quickly, because I'm not sure based on the comments if folks know like the recent history. So I'll share once again. When I was on the CRB, I was the only Black male on there the 2 years I was on there, and that was just a few years ago. And there also wasn't a big push for getting more diversity. The other thing too is for the geographic part, I like this. I think what's being proposed worked really well. The other thing that was missing when I was on there is we didn't have a rep for the 4th, 8th, or 9th. So I think that actually is huge and make a big difference. So I think that's definitely in the right direction. And thank you. That's a really good proposal.
Thank you, Darwin. So I think we've already got a lot of helpful stuff on here. I think I will find a way of summarizing this part of our discussion and building it into what I put forward to represent the discussion to Doug. And again, I'll circulate that back with all of you. And I think maybe one of the things I can do in the short term is to have a roundtable that's specifically around this question of how to use data for this kind of question, in addition to the other forms of representation that Darwin and others have been talking about. So on the second question under this heading, Poppy, have there been comments in the chat about the youth seats?
I typed one and I could give you that in.
Jerry, go for it.
Okay, thank you. My concern is that 18 to 24 is not a great representation of our youth. I believe if we're looking at, getting an actual young person's voice, because, by the time you're hitting 18, you're already off and driving, and with the 2-year term, you're going to be 20 years old by the end of the term. And I just feel like, if you can be tried and sentenced to prison as an adult at 16 years old, you should at least have a voice in something like this. And I would love to see even younger, but there's going to be challenges about but I believe on the internet, for instance, 13 and up is considered, the break is at 12. So 13 and up is for privacy laws and things like that. And I just think that you want a younger voice. I would strongly encourage you to get that, because you're going to hear things that an 18 or 20-year-old may already be out of touch. So even at that age.
I agree with you. One of the concerns I've heard from a lot of different people in the community and groups is that the kinds of materials that the commission has to investigate, hours and hours and hours of video showing violence, interviews describing violence, reading allegations that are that stay with you. I guess that's the easiest way to describe what happens. There's concern about that, which is where the 18 to 24 range has sort of developed. But Jerry, I think you're right that we risk missing a younger perspective, particularly in neighborhoods where especially youth of color, Black and brown youth, are constantly contacted by the police.
Yeah, and they're seeing a lifetime of violence, so that it's hard to differentiate. I totally appreciate that, but what they see in the media and what they see on the streets reflects the reality too.
Yeah. I wonder if at the very least there could be a youth advisory committee like what the New York City CRB has, which is a group of youth who don't necessarily watch hours and hours of the video, but are regularly and structurally brought into the commission's work in New York City. It's a question I don't have an answer for, but I'm going to include it, Jerry, on the list. Are there others who wanted to chime in on this, or are we ready to move on?
There's a little happening in the chat, Patrick. So
okay.
There's sort of two things playing out in the chat right now. One is from Brandon suggesting that, you know, being overly specific in the type of seats that need to be filled may result in having a hard time filling the seats, and other folks kind of Kylie's point, I think, is great. I think the healthiest assumption right now is that the commission is new and there'll be a renewed interest. I vote crossing that bridge if it comes to us, and bear in mind that there wasn't high community trust in the past, and there's some cheers for that comment. So I just, before we move on from either of these two, I want to make sure that that's represented. Please, Andrea. Yeah.
Is there okay if I could just add a little something to there?
Oh, please.
Please.
Kylie's comment was dead on right. There are people clamoring to get on this commission because it is wholly different than the former CRB. And a lot of the reason why people didn't want to be on the CRB, as difficult as it is for some people to accept, is because they didn't see that model as being helpful. They see this model as being helpful. I am getting calls and emails constantly from people who want to be on this new commission. It is not going to be a problem now.
So I'm glad, thank you for that. And I'm glad, I'm just scrolling and seeing your comments here too, Andrea. I think it's a good idea for us to move in the direction of understanding that there will be interest in serving on this commission and not being overly worried about that. Although a point of feedback from me, Patrick, a while ago was the notion of articulating seats as flexible seats that actually are designed in a way to represent those populations that are missing from the overall structure of the commission. So I'll just add that in my voice because I love the idea of flexibility.
Yeah.
And then to the youth seat question, Catherine says at the California Innocence Project, we have high school students 16 to 18 helping us review many of our cases for what that's worth, and some support of that idea as well.
Okay, thank you for that. I see Ariana and then Justin have raised their hands.
Hi everyone. Hi Patrick.
Hi.
Yeah, for youth council, we continue to advocate for the 18 to 24, and these are many young people that are between the ages 14 up to 19. So, you know, folks that Jerry is referring to, but to the previous comment, for young people that there might not be an interest, like there definitely is an interest for folks that applied for the Youth Advisory Board with Patrick. And I just want to say that here in San Diego now, there are more opportunities for young people to really have some sort of base training of how to participate on boards and commissions. So we offer that at Mid-City Can. I know CPI also offers that in their capacity. And these are accessible programs, free programs. And these are a lot of the young people that might not have resources. I know Paving Great Futures also does that. Paving Great Futures is very grassroots, and they're also able to provide leadership programs for young people. So I think it's very important to acknowledge that young people do want to participate. And for us, we, as you know, folks that are in these spaces, it is really our responsibility to give them the space to serve. But yes, we did ask for 18 to 24, and I think that was more for like logistical reasons and legalities in reviewing the cases.
Thank you so much for all that context, Ariana, both about the proposal itself and the many opportunities for engaging with boards and commissions in San Diego. Okay, Justin and then Steve.
Hey, so I wanted to kind of just amplify and give a couple more thoughts on Poppy's statement about seats being flexible rather than fixed. And I like that idea a lot. I think the ability to have seats overlap potentially, if someone is from, you have a data metric for each beat, which I like the idea of using beats rather than districts. But if that person satisfies multiple of the the seats, they're from a beat, they're from a specific district, and if they also satisfy a diversity requirement, I think you can then identify and pull people in from more backgrounds. Specifically, the La Mesa Commission was brought up that members of the disabled community, formerly homeless community or homeless advocates, business community, faith community. I think if you allow seats to overlap in terms of meeting those requirements for the commission, you can ensure that you're pulling in a more diverse representation.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I like the flexibility idea too. And Justin, you're reminding us that intersectionality is an important part of this discussion, that people don't just fit into one box when we're thinking about representation. Steve, you're up.
Hello all. Here in Mira Mesa, we have what would amount to a fairly large, I guess you'd have to call it, diaspora of Filipino people, and they really don't volunteer for much. I was the team leader for the CERT team here for many years, and I think I had maybe one person in that time that spoke Tagalog. They just don't volunteer for things. The younger people are somewhat different. They are more engaged with the community. So I see this youth commission is kind of a way under these circumstances to gain some traction with some of these communities that are rather closed in, and perhaps some more trust for the commission and what it's trying to do, because they communicate with their children. So I for that perspective, I think the youth group is a really good idea.
Thank you for that. And your second to the last sentence is that these appointments should be a way of building trust with the community. And that's what stands out for me, that this isn't just about, well, the most important thing about these appointments is that they should be building trust with different communities. Okay, I'm going to suggest we move forward to the next category of discussion, which we've already leaned into a little bit. These two questions: who serves on the selection committee, and what should the qualifications for commissioners be? I know, Kat, you spoke about conflicts of interest and so on. For those who are here for the first time, the selection committee, this is an idea that there be a community committee made up of representatives of different groups, made up of members of the community who are put onto this committee to review applications, interview people, and then make recommendations to the city council. One of the original ideas is that members of specific groups have a kind of permanent member of that selection committee. And I think so many people have expressed concern about that there be permanent representations from any one group, that the ideas about what this committee might look like have shifted a bit. So we have that on the table, in addition to what should the qualifications for membership on the commission be?
Patrick, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but something's kind of playing out in the chat that I think is important to address before we move on. And that is a comment that was made a few moments ago regarding a broad statement about a group of people and their behaviors. It has been perceived as being a racist comment, and I think it's because it's happening pretty actively in the chat, I want to make sure that you're aware that, and I'll just say, it's a really good idea for us to be cautious about broad generalizations, the words that we use, and the way that we represent our experiences with individuals or groups of folks. And for purposes of productivity of this meeting, I would like to propose that we leave it at that statement and move along. And I'm going to hand it back to you, Patrick, and allow you to kind of decide what you want to do next from there.
Let me ask the group what the group would like to do. Kat, your hand is up.
You know what? My hand was up for a while regarding the expectations or broad general. I mean, more than one person has mentioned about, you know, a process for basically bigoted language. So is there something that we should talk about? How to make sure that doesn't happen?
I think there's concern that a comment that was made about an entire group of people having a particular relationship or lack of a relationship to participation in commissions like this.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and I'm hearing what Poppy's saying though, and others, that we have such a limited amount of time today. Can I ask the folks permission to allow us to move on, and I will follow up with this after the meeting? Tasha, your hand is up.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that you definitely need to follow up with that person to help them understand. But the API community is very involved in their own community. Any group, no matter what it is, if they don't trust something, they're not going to get involved in it. So people may perceive that differently from what they're seeing. And so I just think that when we talk, or even when we come together, there should be diversity training within the commission so that people aren't having these issues and can better regulate themselves. Because these are things that are going to come up when you bring a bunch of different people from different backgrounds who have different perceptions of other people from other backgrounds. So I think that needs to be something because you'll have a sympathy and empathy for different racial groups than you do others because of what we see and what we're projected, how we're raised. Different things like that will happen. So to avoid this, there needs to be a diversity issue because we come from our backgrounds and people will perceive things very differently. I think that anyone that I know from the API community may have taken offense and would have taken offense to that comment because it is very broad and it makes it appear like they're not concerned about their community, or they don't volunteer, or they don't do things. Whenever I go to something that is for their community, trusted in their community, there are a wealth of people that are there. So from their community. So
Tasha, thank you so much for that clarity and the clear-headed and forthright way that you shared it with us. So I will commit to following up on that. Is there anyone else who has something to say at this moment? All right, in the interest of making sure that this roundtable does put forward some ideas we take forward.
Actually, I'm so sorry, Patrick.
Oh.
But can there be issues addressed regarding adultism and racism? Because I think adultism just refers to the assumption on youth and experiences and whatnot. I don't know. I was looking at the chat too. Very disheartened at some of the comments.
Okay, I will go back through the chat and reach out to you if it doesn't leap out at me for help with seeing it, and then follow up on that as well. Thank you for drawing my attention. Tasha, your hand is up.
Yes, I'd like to speak to the comment that was made, about 14 and 16-year-olds. And I think, again, we need to stop generalizing these types of youth, because we also have some of these youths that are graduating early, going on to college as young as 15 years old. And we have many youths that are raising families, youth who have experienced adulthood very early on. And so all youth don't make youth-like experiences for the rest of their youth. Some youth are very advanced. And I think that we need to stop making it appear, and I'm just frustrated because these youth can go to adult prisons, but they can't make adult decisions. So if they're making adult decisions that are negative, why do we think they can't make adult decisions that are positive? That's it.
Again, Tasha, thank you for that incredibly helpful framing. So because I'm not able to keep up with the chat while moderating too, I will go back through the chat and follow up on this concern as well. Is this a moment for us to return to the second heading of questions? Are there folks who have, let's focus on qualifications for commissioners. So are there ideas from the community about the kinds of things you would like to either require or prefer in looking at applications for the commission? Shane.
I just would like to add the comment that we must be careful when we begin to develop qualifications that we do not develop also a set of exclusions.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to be very careful, because if you start saying a particular educational level, professional level, you begin to exclude people that have information that we need. So I don't have anything right now other than the cautionary note that don't allow qualifications to become in some way exclusions.
Thank you. You know, it might be that the community doesn't want to name qualifications in that way at this point, for the reasons that that you're describing. Kat.
Yeah, I guess I've already expressed like conflicts of interest, and I think I know that we're talking about what the screening process should be, but let's say people that are older, people that are white, if you're cis hetero, maybe even in this conversation, just to sit back and possibly listen more. I don't know. I'm kind of bouncing in between like I'm kind of bouncing in between the chat myself and trying to follow the PowerPoint. So, but I'll unmute myself. I mean, I pretty much sent the suggestion about conflicts. So, but it raises a good point that there really should be youth as young as when they could be convicted on there, and made a good point. You know, it should be a plus that they've been, you know, for the commission to hear them. Because like what Tasha said, if they're old enough to face charges or young enough to face charges, they should be old enough to be part of the commission.
So would the community agree that there should be a question on the application, on whatever application is developed, a question about the applicant's history with law enforcement, history with the police, history of police contacts, history of policing in their neighborhoods? Is that information that you think should be included on the application? Would it be relevant to the discussion, to the consideration of people?
Patrick, let me just jump in that there's a little in the chat related to needing to include people with experience with law enforcement interactions, and that conviction should be a plus or
Right.
regarded as a plus, not a minus. And then there's also, this is both from Anne, a qualification could be the ability to synthesize different perspectives. So I think there's two different things that are coming up here, and it occurs to me that it might be, some of this might be better handled either in what's on the application versus what's involved in the questions that the selection committee is asking in interviews.
Okay, thank you for that.
Yeah.
So Shane and then Tasha. Shane, you're muted or canceled, as Ernestine said earlier.
That's more likely. If you include questions concerning prior police activity, you're getting, as that person may be involved in, you're getting some real serious issues as to the legitimacy of the record, the legitimacy of the recovery, rehabilitation. Very dangerous area. And then the comment was just made that might be the very person we want that is on the street to say this is the kind of thing that's happened out there.
Yeah, thank you for that, Tasha. And then Kat, I think your hand is still up, and so after Tasha is Diana.
Yeah, I guess I'm just really confused, having come from a background where I've witnessed OGs. I mean, you guys have I don't know if you guys know, you have a lowrider caravan that's going on right now, side by side with police, with OGs and people with backgrounds. And so you're saying that it's okay for them to work together on this end, but oh, wait, we got to authenticate whether or not they've really been rehabilitated on this end. Well, no officers got shot today in a car caravan. They were hugging, they were praying together. I think you guys make more out of it, and not to generalize all of you, but some are making more out of qualifications than what it needs to be, because you'll also have disqualifiers. You'll also have a means to get rid of someone if they're, completely not, acting correctly. So, you're going to have kids. They need to be able to read, write, like they need to be able to understand, like they need to be able to figure out different complexes in regards to policy, procedures, and laws. Like those should be what your qualifiers are. Saying that somebody with an adverse background is not going to be a good person, but yet you'll ride all day long with them, you'll work with them in the community as police officers, but you don't want them to judge you while you make arrests of many of their families, friends, and whatsoever. That just doesn't fit well with me. And also people who come out of prison, who turn their lives around, generally are harder than, not all, but some are harder than others on rights and wrongs and, even politics, right? So I think that throws it out the window, and that we need to stop looking at ways to disqualify people. We need to look at ways to, move forward with qualifications.
Yeah, thank you for that. What I was thinking is that hearing about people who had been harassed or had other encounters with that those are the folks we would want to be a part of the conversation. But what I'm hearing you say is that actually any effort to do that is going to flip over into a disqualification really quickly. And that's a brilliant.
No, I guess what I'm saying is that like every time you guys say something, it's almost like, oh no, we can't do that because are they really rehabilitated? I mean, I want to say, is every officer really an officer? Like, come on. You don't know until they act up. So it's like just saying, why can't somebody who has an adverse background be on the commission? Because it didn't happen that way with this last commission. Everybody that had adverse backgrounds or that were in any way adversary to police, or that's what police felt or the mayor felt, they somehow didn't make it on your commission for whatever reason.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for that. Diana and then Kate.
Yeah, thank you. And my name's Diana. I'm a current medical student at UC San Diego. And I wanted to first kind of just amplify what's already been said about sort of, I saw some things in the chat about trying to avoid having people on the commission who have conflicts of interest or take money from the police or related entities. And I also appreciate what Tasha was saying and sort of definitely not excluding people who have had adverse backgrounds, but even trying to include people who have had negative experiences with the police, to include their voices. But I actually wanted to switch gears in terms of qualifications and I guess suggest an idea or a thought that I had and get you all's input, which was that because we do see such tragic rates of people who end up being either injured or, God forbid, killed by the police, who have the police called on them because of a mental illness or because of a disability that predisposes them to poor interactions with the police. I think I would really like to see at least somebody who is on the commission who has experience either treating people with mental illness, maybe it's a social worker, maybe it's a doctor or a nurse or somebody like that. But I hesitate to put sort of a stringent criterion on it because of what we've already said about, not wanting to restrict other folks with valuable backgrounds. But I do think that it's important to emphasize people who have the lived experience of treating folks with disabilities, folks with mental illness. So I would be really open to you guys' thoughts on that, but that's something that I feel pretty strongly about.
Thank you. And that does touch back to something Doug said earlier about La Mesa's attempt to have a mental health expert on their new oversight commission. I think Tasha's warning to us all is sticking with us, and now it's becoming more difficult to think about how qualifications can actually be misused in constituting a commission. Kate.
Yes, thank you. I really think that we're talking about two different things. We're talking about qualifications, and then we're talking about diversity, like what do we want to see in people on the board. But for qualifications, I think it should be really basic. I think we need somebody who lives in the city of San Diego, who is not current or former law enforcement, or married to or in a relationship with, or however far we want to branch that out, with law enforcement. And basically, I don't think we should have any other, I can't think of any other disqualifications. And so I think it needs to be broad. And then the selection committee, when recruiting is going on and when the selection is going on, can bring out, like people are saying in the chat, why do you want to be on this commission? Somebody may not want to talk about their negative interaction with law enforcement or put it in writing or on an application. But when you interview, and I think there's going to be a lot of people that the selection committee is going to be interviewing, then the selection committee is going to have the hard choice of sort of figuring out how that diversity is represented in the people that are selected. I think there's going to be overlap between having someone from each district and then having, the various things that we talked about police data, but that all goes into the diversity issue. We're just talking about qualifications. I think they ought to be minimalist and broad and not exclusive.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Kate. Jerry, and then Kat and Tasha, are your hands up again, or are they still up from earlier?
Yes, mine's up. New.
Mine's up, but I'm trying to bring it down.
I can bring it down for you.
Okay,
oh, you got it. Okay, Jerry, go ahead.
Okay, just real quickly, I'm on the Behavioral Health Advisory Board of the county, and the county and the state are finally learning that peer specialists are very valuable, and so we're doing a lot of things to beef up the use of peers in addressing people with mental illness and substance abuse disorders. So I personally have a long history of a wide variety of things from crime to drug addiction and recovery. And I think it would be crystal clear within a few conversations what my intentions and value of my contributions would be in order for you to vet if I'm worthy of being on your board or not. So I like what the last speaker said about, trying to minimize qualifications, but do you have some guidelines? Especially, I love what Diana said about including somebody with a lived experience with a mental illness, because we know almost a third of our jail population are people with some type of mental illness, and there's people in recovery have a tremendous perspective that people, frankly, without crime and drug addiction experiences have no idea what we're going through. So it's a valuable perspective, but I would err much more on the side of supporting their contributing rather than distrusting them or being suspicious, because I think our motivations are to try. I'm speaking for myself, my motivation is to give back because I took a lot from society when I was younger, and I have spent a lifetime trying to do that. So I think there's a lot of people out there that would be very valuable to contribute. Thanks.
Thank you for that, Jerry. I'm getting a request. So there are different opinions about law enforcement and former law enforcement on the commission. Some have said, in fact, one of our speakers just talked about no current or former law enforcement or relatives, whether spouse, children, however tight that circle is defined. Others are saying, actually, why wouldn't we want some former law enforcement potentially represented on the commission? And so I'm being asked to ask you to expand on that or drill down on it a bit. Kylie.
Just to come off of the point that I had made in chat, I've got on my legal observer team, I have 2 former law enforcement officers whose experience is absolutely invaluable. And both of them left law enforcement intentionally. So these aren't, not every former law enforcement officer is going to be, they can bring a lot of experience that can be really helpful, and they can know things that, those of us who haven't been ever law enforcement don't know about, just because there's a lot of stuff that they keep secretive, So, the whole thin blue line stuff. And so anyway, that would just be my point, is that, maybe not keep former law enforcement out, or at least define what is law enforcement. Arguably, I'm former law enforcement because I worked for a DA for 3 months. Does that, exclude me?
That's a really good question. Tasha, you're up.
Yeah, I think and I won't speak for everybody, but if you agree, great, then we're on the same page. I think for most people, to address what Kylie is talking about, is that for years, the commission has had law enforcement kind of on their throats and running the commission. And so the trust and then just everything that's happening out in the communities where law enforcement has, which Kylie is aware, has used a lot of mistreatment of their authority. So there is a trust issue in infiltration of this commission by law enforcement to then derail what the people have really pushed for in voting for this Measure B to even happen. And if you look at the history, San Diego Police Officers Association and other law enforcement and mayors have heavily entrenched themselves within commissions like this to actually cause different decisions and outcomes to happen for officers who have violated policy, procedure, and law.
Yeah, thank you for that. And it reminds me, Tasha, to give the community another update about the interim standard operating procedures. A part of what Tasha's describing is a history of the former CRB for whose meetings, the closed meetings when the board was deliberating on cases, internal affairs was present for those meetings. At the community's request in the new interim standing operating procedures, that is no longer the case for the commission. Again, those are interim standard operating procedures, but a part of, not all of what Tasha's describing, a part of what Tasha's describing is because in CRB meetings, IA officers were always present for the closed portions of the meetings themselves. Andrea and then Youssef.
So one thing that I just kind of want to put in there for people to consider when they're thinking about law enforcement is there's one thing that is fairly different about the new commission, and it is the commission's not just ability but requirement in certain instances to obtain the advice of professionals and consultants. So when people are thinking about, oh, we may need law enforcement on the commission as a commissioner because we need that expertise, that may not be the case. They can always hire, they have the ability to hire policy analysts and consultants. And so those people can perform or add that expertise of law enforcement. It doesn't necessarily have to be a person on the commission. So I'm not, saying which way it should be. I'm just letting you know that when you start thinking about, do we want law enforcement on as commissioners or not, that there is the alternative of just having someone in law enforcement, 1, 2, 3, more, whatever, as a consultant to the commission. They wouldn't have voting rights. They wouldn't be a commissioner. But the commissioners would always have that professional, have the ability to consult with that professional as to what should be done. So just think of that when you start thinking of whether you want law enforcement on the commission or not.
And Andrea, you're a co-host of this. You don't have to raise your hand. You just jump in and interrupt me anytime you want. I think, Andrea, this reminds me that you also, I think it was you, maybe it was Kylie in a previous meeting, somebody made the point that the investigators hired by the commission, that most investigators are themselves former law enforcement. So even the staff investigators have access to some of the experience and background, which adds to the mix that we're talking about.
And so when let's say the commission has at least one investigator on staff, probably will be former law enforcement. They may have the title of investigator, but that person can be used by the commission in any capacity. They can consult with him. They can ask him to look at different issues and questions they have and give their input. That was really one of the most important things for me about the new commission, is making sure that it had the ability to have the professionals on board that could advise them, but that the community members on the commission were going to be the actual individuals who made the decisions, right? Those decisions need to be informed, but this commission is about the community and about the community having input, and it needs to be informed, and so they have those experts. So hopefully that will help people kind of figure out what they'd like to see.
Thank you. I think Tasha's comment also that the most recent history over many years of CRB is that the community felt some distrust, in part because of real or perceived proximity to law enforcement. And so moving forward, it's important to correct for that. Tasha, were you jumping in on that?
Yeah, I was. There actually was a misconduct of police even before, I guess, this CRB, the old CRB. And there was some issues. So it came to light that internal affairs was actually strong arming decisions within the commission. And so that actually came out. It might have been around the same time that there was a probe that was going on as well. So this is something that we know. I'm not going to generalize because all SDPD officers are not rogue, reckless, and lawless, but we do know that there has been an infiltration of officers who do commit violations against policy, procedures, and law and get away with it because they have other officers that are embedded in internal affairs, and then they have officers that are embedded in the commission. And so we know that for a long time, officers have been getting away with this good old boy network of allowing these offenses to go unmanaged and having the least likely consequences to those officers, not even bringing them forward to a commission like yours. And so we know how difficult it was, even for your commission moving forward from that, getting information on complaints from the police department that was supposed to give it to you. So we don't trust them.
Yeah, that's the message I'm hearing loud and clear. Okay, Youssef, and then Jack, and then Darwin, and then Kat, and then Kate. So Youssef, you're up. But you may be muted, Youssef.
There we go. Youssef Miller, Racial Justice Coalition of San Diego. And for a strong community-led commission, that means no law enforcement on that side of the table. We're talking about community in a commission of police practices. We're reviewing police practices, and to have them on both sides of the table, it just doesn't make any sense. Everything that the commission comes through, or their findings and their everything that they come up with is going to the police anyway afterwards. So why should they be on both sides of the table? It's that conflict of interest that we're talking about. And the people on one side of the table shouldn't have that kind of proximity to law enforcement. It should be a true community-led commission on police practices. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Thank you. Jack, then Darwin, then Kat.
Thank you, Patrick. I just wanted to say that I really like Ms. St. Julian's point about bringing that expertise on in a consultant capacity as opposed to the commissioners. That may be a good way to get around weaponizing the qualifications of commissioners that we've been talking about to exclude certain groups from being on the commission, and instead bring experts on with those qualifications in a consultant capacity. And I should say I'm also a classmate of Diana's, who brought up the point about bringing on a mental health professional. We've talked about this idea a lot, and it's something I support. And I think that bringing them on in a consultant capacity would be great, with the caveat that just because someone has expertise in this area, doesn't necessarily mean they have the right perspective of concepts like equity, how structural discrimination works, things like that. And so for that reason, I think it's really important that they're selected with input from the community as opposed to just being nominated by council members or something like that. Because I think it's been demonstrated that not everyone on city council understands those concepts themselves. So, having that vetting process done by the community, I think is important.
Great. Thank you so much for that. Darwin, then Kat, then Kate.
Yeah, I just want to thank you. I just want to add real quickly, I agree with what Tasha said. It felt like the role that IA played was like an extension of the union, like they're an advocate for the police quite often in terms of my interaction with them. So that's a really key point. The other thing too, Patrick, I just want to check in with you in terms of the process. What at some point, can you tell us what's going to be presented at the February 10th meeting? Like, based on this meeting, what's going to be given to the council?
I'm handing everything forward. So what I will do tomorrow when I put together notes from this meeting is send them to everybody on the list too. What happens on the commission side is that Doug, who's the chair of the transition committee, will introduce them to the transition committee. And then Doug, if I'm remembering your next step, then you take what the transition committee puts forward to the PSLN committee.
No, the full commission will vote on it first, and then we take it to the.
Oh, right, because there's a, yeah. So, but Darwin, in addition to that process, everything I produce out of these public roundtables, I'm also making public in every way that I can.
Did we address all the points that you brought up at the beginning, all those different areas?
We still have 3 questions coming up. Term length and term limits, reasonable expectations for service, and establish, or there's a question about a removal for cause guideline.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Okay, Kat and then Kate, and then maybe we can get on to these other questions too in the last half hour.
I just wanted to share real quick, back in 2014, when there was an investigation into a woman known as Jane Doe by the city attorney, because she was filing complaints against law enforcement officers. So the city attorney actually stalked this woman and was taking photos while she was out. It was something huge with Anthony Arebelos and I can't remember the other guy, Christopher Hayes. Those 2 officers. Basically, it was just exposed the victim shaming and the rape culture of the SDPD, and there was no support for that Jane Doe. So that could be a reason why people don't necessarily want to share their story, because of fear, because of safety concerns. But even more so, if somebody, I mean, I kind of in agreement, like just to emphasize it more about terms of safety, this woman was in danger and the city attorney was contributing to that. And yeah, it was a really terrible time that I remember for sure. But nobody, I mean, Jane Doe should be on the commission, but there's reasons why she needs to be Jane Doe, you know, realistically.
Yeah.
And Patrick, if I may, this is Poppy. I just want to kind of layer in some of what's happening in the chat to this point. That and once again, perhaps Tasha can just lead us today. A point that Tasha made in the chat, which I think is such a good one, is the you know, to the question of who should serve, the prioritizing of individuals with specific identities that are disproportionately impacted and or with lived experiences. And so I'm just thinking that really gets to the heart of what it is that we're talking about. So rather than saying, you know, what is your specific identity, simply asking people to self-identify that they are among groups that are or have been disproportionately impacted, and we've described, you know, various types of experiences. And then the question of or the idea about sexual assault, rape culture is also kind of peppering through the chat, Patrick. And I just want to acknowledge that that the conversation around police officers serving on this commission is one of a power imbalance. And I really think that that's the thing that we don't want to forget as we're having these discussions, is an attempt to try to right a power imbalance. And so I'm hopeful. If I didn't summarize your comments in the chat, please forgive me, but I am trying to just bring them over briefly. And that's all I've got.
Thank you very much. Yeah, the power imbalance is key. Kate, you're up.
Yeah, I guess I just want to make a final comment on the law enforcement thing. I see Kylie, who of course is my comrade in the National Lawyers Guild, has withdrawn her objection. But what we say in the law is it even the perception of a conflict of interest is a conflict of interest.
Yeah, that's right.
We have to withdraw. And this is all about community trust. And the community is not going to trust if they read the resumes and see that Commissioner X is a former SDPD or La Mesa or whatever law enforcement person. I just think that's a reality.
Yeah.
So I do think that that should be really about the only disqualification.
Thank you for that. Kylie, are you speaking up, Kylie, to withdraw your comment?
Yeah, no, I'm totally wrong. I am totally wrong. All of you have all made fantastic points. I am totally wrong here. Y'all are right. It's just that simple.
Okay, then I'm going to represent that using your language, everyone's language, that the perception of a conflict of interest in this moment in the history of police oversight in San Diego is a conflict of interest, and that there is strong community sentiment that current or former law enforcement should not serve on this commission. That's what I'm hearing. Feel free to email me if you have a contradictory opinion, but that's what I'm hearing.
I just say that I actually said it was more than that. I mean, I think if someone is married to a current,
right,
or in a significant other relationship, and we probably need to define how far out that goes, but not just being current or former.
So close family relationship.
Can I just ask, so are we saying former, current or former law enforcement generally, or just San Diego, or just SPD? I just want to make sure how specific we're being or how global we're being.
That's a good question.
No, my comment was really basically any. I don't think it's just SDPD. I mean, we have problems with the Mesa and National City and all over the place.
Tasha, I think your hand is up again.
Yeah, I think that we're forgetting that this is supposed to be an independent commission that is separate from police altogether in any way. And that a lot of us voted this way because we do not believe that the police can police themselves. And so that's why we voted for Measure B. So in saying that, I think that, if we can move forward to try and get to whatever your questions were, we do not believe that the police should police themselves. We do not believe they can do that in an authentic and trusting way. And there is plenty of documents and data that have proven that. They had a police probe they had to go through. So I just think, the conversation, we are an independent commission separate from police who has to, in essence, judge their wrongdoings. And so that's kind of, what it should be and how it should be. Everybody voted on that. Many people in my community voted because they wanted, they do not want police to police themselves. And so, that's kind of what it is.
Thank you. And I'll pair that with Andrea's reminder that anyone can be brought in as a consultant at any time, just not as a voting member of this commission.
Agreed.
I'm gonna, thank you for that. I'm gonna ask that we do look at these last three questions, unless somebody wants to get in another word on this last one.
Can I just very quickly, and I don't want to throw a wrench.
Yes, Jerry.
Thank you. The question is, in appointing commissioners, have we already decided that people with a criminal record that may not be able to pass a police background check be qualified to serve? Because that might be something that you would want is somebody that has experience in being incarcerated in the past or not. Which may preclude them from being permitted.
I think the sentiment I've heard is that there should be no restrictions like that.
Okay, great.
Awesome. Yeah.
I just had something super quick.
Okay.
And maybe it's already been said, but it should definitely be an interview question as to what a person's relationship with law enforcement is. And whether it's been a good interaction or a bad, but also maybe people might not think about, oh, do you have any close friends? You know, maybe your best friend from high school is a police officer, and that would make a person more likely to divulge things that should be confidential, you know, to someone else. So instead of just limiting it to spouse and, you know, parents or whatever, you just ask that as a general question, that it's a disclosure that they make when they interview. What is your, and then maybe have a checklist that you make sure you ask everyone, close friends, you know, former work associates or whatever. I mean, just kind of like a background check that you would do for the military, or, you know, something, or to become a police officer. I'm sure that they ask them, do you have any interaction with felons or, you know, criminals or whatever. So just to have that as a disclosure step during the interview.
Right. So not just an application question, but also to draw them out to find other potential conflicts. Good. Okay, so let's, would folks like to talk about the removal for cause guidelines, or reasonable expectations for service, or term length and term limits, given that we have about 15 minutes?
Patrick, there are a number of folks who have their hands up, and I'm not sure if those are carryover from earlier comments. So I would just suggest.
I think they're carryovers.
Okay.
So yeah. Kate, Kylie, Darwin, and Tasha, are you? Yeah, I think you're carryovers. If I'm wrong, please feel free to speak up. Oh, who is that? Barbara. Barbara, are you trying to raise your hand? Okay, please unmute yourself.
Okay. I'm Barbara Gellman. I'm a neighborhood watch coordinator for University City. And just a few comments about qualifications or guidelines when you're looking for people. Asking them what community involvement have they had, such as with the schools, with organizations, with committees. Find out a little bit about how they've been helpful in their community. I feel they should be open and fair-minded, a good listener, and able to understand and decipher conversation and concerns.
Check. Thank you, Barbara. I'm struggling to get us through these last three. So I'm going to suggest, because removal for cause has been a sticking point with folks, I'm going to suggest that we talk about that for the last few minutes. Again, I know that people have had a history with this issue, specifically related to the former CRB, and I know people care about it now. So just to sort of remind folks, we did have the former language about felony or other crime or moral turpitude. That is now removed from the language. I'm going to share a screen for what the current language is. Are folks able to see this? Doug, I think you might be unmuted. Could you try to mute yourself? Sorry. That's such a weird and rude thing to ask. So this is the current interim language. And it looks like what the language that replaced that former language is that, let's see, conviction of a crime that demonstrably impedes the ability to serve on the commission. And then that's spelled out a little further in the following paragraph. And ultimately, according to this language, a 2/3 vote of the whole commission is required to recommend that a member be removed. Jerry.
Hi, just real quickly, and a person with some experience in being arrested, I worry that somebody who is arrested and under indictment, for instance, well, let me back up. We should remember that we're not just talking about the police. We're talking about the police and their relationship with the criminal justice system. And there is a buddy-buddy relationship. And if police give the nod to prosecutors or yes or no, it can influence what the prosecutors decide to do. So somebody with a more serious crime perhaps is highly conflicted because of their, but what we might do is that person recuses themselves from any votes until their case is concluded. And if they're found guilty, then they're removed from the board. But if they're found not guilty, they're allowed to stay on the board and continue voting, but to have some kind of way to mitigate that. But you know, they're also compromised in that they're in the conversation. So that's, you know, so think of that. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for that. Let's see, Shane, you're up next.
I like the context as how it's drafted. I think you've covered a broad range. I'm always interested and worried about a conflict of interest. Is pretty broad. I think what is missing is some further definition of conflict of interest to deal with recusals. There'll be times when the standards would require a member to recuse themselves from participation at various levels of the proceedings. So I think that has to be brought into place somewhere along the line.
There's a different section of the standard operating procedures that deals with conflicts of interest. The only thing I copied here is on this question of involuntary removal.
Well, other than that comment, I think you've done a pretty good job on that.
Well, I don't want to take credit for it. I didn't write this. This was this was a group of, it was a committee working to update the interim procedures, but thank you. Any other comments about this? Well, then in our last couple of minutes, I'll just ask, are there strong feelings about, you know, we've discussed term length, number of terms in previous roundtables. Are there any thoughts about expectations for service on the commission in terms of time commitment, ensuring that we're not expecting commissioners to do too much, and ensuring that the commission is a reasonable possibility for working people who have many other obligations in their lives? Are there any community thoughts about how we can ensure participation? Oh no, Andrea, your hand is still up. Diana.
Sorry, I just had a quick question. Maybe I missed this at a previous meeting, but would commissioners be compensated for serving on the commission?
The current model is not to compensate commissioners, but one of the messages that I've been putting forward from the community is that that there are various aspects of the volunteer labor aspect that actually do make things more difficult. Andrea, are you trying to speak?
Yeah, the problem with that is this current San Diego charter amendment does not allow commissioners or board members to be paid. So it's not something that we can consider unless doing another charter amendment.
We are trying to think about transportation, childcare, you know, meals being provided at meetings and so on. Yeah, Tasha.
Can you hear me? Oh, okay.
Yes.
I do think that is going to to cause issues for families that have lower income statuses or even middle class if they have to take on other responsibilities and don't have the means to do that in their budget, which is why most of the commission has been folks who have higher economic statuses. So it inadvertently, I'm not saying that it was meant to be that way, but inadvertently it has pushed out folks who would want to be part of the commission. So it's inadvertently disqualifying folks and becomes part of that white power structure system that constantly leaves folks of color and different life experiences and social economic statuses out of the decision-making process. So it needs to be something that is heavily looked at for other ways to be able to compensate their time.
Yeah. Yeah, and even providing resources like mental health care for the kinds of work that people on the commission do, and childcare for meeting times, and remote access for case review. And where needed, technology to be able to engage in that remote access. Those are some of the ways that what Tasha and others are describing can be mitigated. But it is a real structural inequality in terms of who's able to participate. Poppy.
Yeah, you know, Patrick, this is perhaps the area that I feel most strongly about, and I'm using my own lived experience to inform. Being a single mom on the margins, 2 young kids, a kiddo with a disability. Just a few years back, I could never have served at the level that has been required by the CRB. And so I have such a clear perspective of the barriers that exist for service in that way. And I just think it is incumbent upon the commission itself to arrange itself with enough capacity and resourcing that folks are able to serve if they would like to serve. And so I think some things that we can talk about or suggest are limiting the number of cases that individual commissioners are charged with evaluating at any one time. You know, being more realistic about the number of meetings that are being required. I know this feels really minutia, probably, but it's absolutely the kinds of things that if we don't inform proactively, it'll get missed, and then by virtue of you know, folks' limited capacity, they'll just naturally drop off from service on the commission. So I'll be quiet now, but you know, this is my heart speaking here. It's really important that we think about this.
It's not a small
Poppy,
issue
don't be
at
quiet.
all.
I don't, Poppy, I don't want you to be quiet now. I am so glad that you spoke about this, and I hope that there can be workarounds. Somebody put in the chat that although it's not compensation, that there are still stipends that can be given. Also, you know, compensation for such thing as childcare, but also even just looking at how the commission does its work. You know, before the CRB was very limited in how it could review records. That all has been completely blown apart and opened up. Remote viewing of records could make it so much easier for people to be able to do as much work as possible from their own homes, so that they are not, you know, burdened with, you know, spending more time that's necessary. And so I think that there's a lot of reimagining that the new commission can do in terms of how they do their work to become even more effective, but spending less time, you know. And part of that key may be the staff, you know, the consultants, the policy analysts, the administrators who can do a lot of that legwork, so that the commissioners are only going to do what they are brought on to do. They are brought on to give their common sense perspective of what the community feels and needs in terms of law enforcement. That's what they're there for, not to spend a bunch of time doing legwork.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, the way that the work of the commission has been transformed by Measure B will do a lot of this work. And I think, you know, I think we need to have a kind of, we need to ask the new commission to set up a conscious and intentional way of measuring the amount of work people are being asked to do, the times that they're expected to be available, the transportation, again, childcare, family care, and so on. So I've got that in my notes as well. We're almost at the end. Kate, I see your hand up. Tasha, is your hand up again?
Yes.
Go for it, Tasha. You're first, then Kate.
Yeah, you know, as a mom, I honestly think there can definitely be workarounds. I've seen this city make many workarounds for things that they value, even getting support from nonprofits to be able to help folks, and funding those nonprofits to be able to help folks. So there has to be a workaround that this city will be invested in and will value these commissioners for compensation. So I hope that we look at that, because even with youth, you know, we're going to be limiting the type of youth that we bring in from the different areas, and then we're going to wind up getting youth from areas where the income is much higher.
Thank you for that. Kate, and then Shane, and then we'll be done for the day.
I just had some thoughts when Poppy was talking, because I think I was oblivious when we were going through, and I don't know where this is in the bylaws or standard operating procedures or something, but there's requirements that all the commissioners go on a certain number of ride-alongs. There's requirements that they be on at least one committee, one standing committee, and then there's a lot of other committees. I mean, there's a lot of time commitments that don't just involve case review. I mean, the case reviews themselves are very time intensive. And then there's all that sort of other things that are currently, and I think that needs to be looked at and possibly taken out if we're talking about really wanting to make this accessible to people whose you know, who have substantial other commitments on their time, whether it's you know, whether it's childcare or elder care or you know, who knows what. So that's just something that we might think about. And the other thing I think I want Doug to mention at the end is about the two commission meetings, the transition committee and the full commission meeting on Monday and Tuesday when the ordinance is going to be talked about. If you could do that at the end so that people.
Yeah, I'll do that, because those are public meetings, and so you're welcome to be there, public. Shane, and this is the final comment before we close out.
The comment of the need to structure it so everybody can participate or be potentially a party of the commission. It's my suggestion that it be large enough that each complaint can be investigated by a smaller group, say 3 people. So the whole body is not involved, and only that particular complaint has that group of people. And they'll eventually make a report to the whole body.
So that is the current, that's the way the current board works.
Okay. Yeah. As Emily Littell would say, never mind.
Patrick, can we also talk about February 10th, 9 a.m.?
Yes. So February 10th is the PSLN meeting at 9 a.m. We are begging you to show up to that meeting to ensure that these community roundtables are taken into account and treated with respect and seriousness by the City Council. That's 9 a.m. on Wednesday, is it Wednesday the 10th? Yes, Wednesday, February 10th. PSLN stands for Public Safety and Livable Neighborhoods. I'll post the link once I have it on that page where I track everything. And So that's the meeting that we just would love for everyone to be there to continue representing this community.
And if I could add just a little more, if you don't mind on that, Patrick.
Please.
Yeah, so Patrick has done, and Poppy, the Community Outreach Committee, have done a fabulous job with these forums and gathering information. But the city council at the PSLN meeting, and actually later on, the larger city council, they are only going to take notice of this if you show up and let them know how important it is that they follow these recommendations, all right? They look at who is there and who is speaking, all right? So please, and it's so much easier now to attend because you can attend virtually. The PL, but just to let everybody know, to back up a little, the Public Safety and Livable Neighborhoods Committee is the first committee that this new ordinance has to get through. And we need everybody to show up to that meeting and let the commission know, let the committee know how important each of these things are. And what I would ask, if you are not already signed up at sandiagansforjustice.com, please go there, sign up. We will be sending out a reminder about this. We will be giving, helping people in terms of understanding the importance of what's going on, because we need to be there. We have got to be there.
Thank you so much. And thank you to all of you for being here throughout this process. I'm going to do my best to represent on the specific questions that have been put forward. The overarching message that's going on this short document I'll put together and share with all of you. The sort of motto, the motto of the new commission must be transparency and accountability at every step, and not just after the fact. The message we've heard over and over, I think Tasha in the very first roundtable said, everything that can be public must be public, and not so late that there's nothing we can do about it. In every decision made about this commission, those are the overarching principles. That's what I've heard time and time again from all of you. That's what'll be item number one. So thank you again. I hope you're all safe and healthy. I hope to see you at the PSLN committee on February 10th. Before that, you can attend our transition committee meeting on Monday at noon, I think. And Doug just posted a link to the agenda. And then Tuesday at 5 is an open, what used to be the CRB meeting where we'll be taking these things up to. So thank you all again. Take care, be safe. See you on the other side.
Bye, you guys. Thank you.
Take care, Tasha.